Imagine being 19 years old, freshly bathed, dressed in silk that doesn't belong to you. You were told you were being summoned for service. You were told it was an honor. You were never told you would not return home. The corridors are quiet. Too quiet. Eunuchs adjusts your sleeves. Someone corrects the way you lower your eyes. Someone else takes your name, not to record it, but to erase it. Behind a screen, you hear breathing. Soft, controlled, powerful. You don't see her yet, but you already understand this is not a court appointment. In a few minutes, you'll learn why you were chosen. In a few minutes, you'll understand why no one asked for your consent. And in a few minutes, you'll realize this night is not about desire at all. It's about access. This isn't fiction. This wasn't a scandal whispered by enemies. This was policy. And the person waiting behind the curtain was not an emperor. Her name was Wu Zetian. And what she built inside the Forbidden City was so unsettling that history tried to erase the men first and turn her into a monster afterward. And this story did not begin with excess. It began with a girl. Before we go any deeper into this story, if hidden horrors of the past fascinate you, subscribe to Grim History. Hit the like button. And once you reach the moment that unsettles you most, tell me where you're watching from. The year was 624. During the height of the Tang dynasty, a child was born beneath an order that did not bend for women. She was not royalty. She was not an heir. She was Wu, daughter of a wealthy timber merchant from Sichuan, a land where women's voices vanished into mountains before they were heard. While boys studied the classics and chased titles, Wu read in shadows. She traced the words of dead men, memorized history. Poetry, philosophy, not for leisure but for survival. Even at 14, she understood that in her world, knowledge cut deeper than blades. That same year, her fate was sealed. An imperial order summoned her to the palace as a secondary concubine to Emperor Tong. It was called an honor. In truth, it was confinement dressed as privilege. The palace was not a home. It was a machine. Hundreds of women waited their entire lives for a single glance. Most were never noticed. Most disappeared quietly. Wu did not wait. She watched. She listened. She studied power the way others studied embroidery. While hands stitched silk, she stitched exits in her mind. She learned the language of silence, the meaning behind bows, the weight carried by a glance held too long. Tong barely saw her. Years passed untouched. Then, as tradition demanded, the emperor died. By custom, Wu's life should have ended with him. As a former concubine, she was sent to a Buddhist convent. Silence, seclusion, erasure, but oblivion never came. At 26, when she should have faded into anonymity, Wu returned to the palace, not as a shadow, but as fire. Against every rule, she became consort to Gaozong, the new emperor and son of the man who once owned her fate. It was more than taboo. It was unprecedented. History never fully explains how she came back. A secret summons, hidden alliances, perfect timing. What is certain is this. Wooten never left anything to chance. Once inside again, she moved quickly. Rivals vanished. The empress was demoted. Others were silenced or sent away. No public bloodshed, only absences that piled up like fallen leaves. When Gaozong grew ill, Wu became his voice. She issued decrees, met diplomats, delivered judgments. The empire already obeyed her. Only the title remained. In the year 690 she dropped the disguise. Wu Zetian declared herself Empress of China, not regent, not co-ruler, but sole sovereign. She founded her own dynasty and ruled for nearly 2 decades. The Confucian order shuddered. Scholars quoted texts that no longer applied. Because Wu Zetian was not a flaw in the system, she was its inversion. She governed efficiently. She reorganized ministries. She promoted talent over bloodlines. Every document carried her authority. But her most radical mark was left not in law, but in the private chambers of the palace. There, where power had always flowed from emperor to women, Wu Zetian redirected it. Because she understood something no ruler before her dared to admit. The body had always been a political tool, so she chose a different one. Wu Zetian did not do this for pleasure. She did it for control. History would later condemn her with particular fury, because nothing unsettles patriarchy more than seeing its own rules reflected back in reverse. What had always been accepted in emperors, vast harems, pleasure palaces, intimacy traded for promotion became an unforgivable scandal the moment a woman exercised the same power. In history, male desire was politics. Female desire was treated as a crime. By now the throne was secure. The crown was no longer symbolic. Wu Zetian had not simply survived the system. She had hollowed it out and stepped inside alone. But even absolute authority cannot function on decrees alone. Power needs eyes. It needs ears. It needs bodies close enough to sense betrayal before it speaks. The true turning point did not come on battlefields. It came in the perfumed corridors of the palace. Wu Zetian did not reform the system. She bent it until it became a weapon. From this decision emerged the Kongen, officially a ceremonial office, unofficially a surveillance machine disguised as intimacy. In practice, it functioned as a state-controlled male harem. The men were not chosen for noble blood or military skill. They were selected by other standards. The firmness of a jaw, the symmetry of a face, the softness of a voice, the elegance of hands moving across a jin. Some arrived through ambitious officials who offered their own sons as tokens of loyalty. Others were found by quiet agents sent across the provinces to locate young men who were compliant, unconnected, and easily erased. Wooten was said to impose strict requirements: untouched youth, flawless skin, intelligence paired with submission. She was not collecting companions. She was assembling instruments. Each man was trained not only in intimacy, but in listening. They learned how to observe without being noticed, how to retention in a room, how to translate sighs, pauses, and glances into information. To belong to the Kongen was to become the empire's censors wrapped in silk. The first to rise was Fun Shao, born without title or lineage in a rural village. One day, he was noticed by a princess. Soon after, he was kneeling beside the imperial bed. To legitimize his presence, he was ordained as a Buddhist monk and renamed Shui Wai. Though there was nothing aesthetic about his ascent, he became Wuxian's shadow lover, emissary, and forcer. He commissioned temples, oversaw the construction of the Hall of Light, and received military honors without ever lifting a sword. He rode imperial horses. He humiliated officials with a smile. He spoke when the empress remained silent, but power devours its favorites. Huai grew arrogant. He publicly insulted Daist monks certain of his invincibility. Then he crossed the line. After a dispute with the empress, he set fire to the Hall of Light, the very monument that symbolized her authority. The building burned. So did his protection. He was ambushed and killed, his name erased, his ashes scattered at the White Horse Temple. No epitaph followed. No mourning was permitted. Yet the void he left did not remain empty. After him came Shen Nanshu, the quiet one, not a politician, not an enforcer, perhaps a musician, perhaps a physician, perhaps a poet. What mattered was what he did not seek. He asked for no titles. He spied on no one. He passed no judgment. He played the goon as if offering solace rather than ambition. His silence inside a system built on control became rare enough to be tolerated. He remained until his quiet death. Rumored to have come from a tonic, he prepared himself. No hatred followed him, only whispers. He was the exception. The most feared figures arrived later. The Zhang brothers, Zhang Yuixi and Zhang Chongzhong, were not merely companions. They were centers of gravity, introduced through elite recommendation. Some said by princess typing. They quickly became the gatekeepers of the empire. Young, educated, ruthless, they transformed the Kongen into something closer to a hidden ministry. No decision reached the empress without passing through them. One managed audiences and foreign envoys. The other drafted decrees. Officials knelt before them before they ever saw Wooten. For the Confucian elite, this was unbearable. Not because a harem existed, but because it worked. The brothers were ministers, spies, diplomats, and symbols of everything. The patriarchal order denied. Wuxian had taken the old design women obey men command and melted it in the fire of her crown. Desire became a function of the state. Intimacy became surveillance. Later historians would call her perverse, not for her actions, but because she wielded masculine rules more effectively than most emperors. By 699, the Kongen was fully institutionalized. It had ranks, records, and duties. Some members wrote imperial poetry, others led rituals. Many held titles and estates, but all were pieces on Wooten's board. There was no romance, only strategy. The empress did not sleep with men. She slept with information. The city whispered impossible numbers. 3,000 men, one for each night. But those figures were exaggeration, shaped by fear. The truth was more unsettling. Her hair was not indulgence. It was a mirror, and it revealed what power looks like when stripped of gender. Absolute power never stays still. It swells, hardens, and eventually rots from within like fruit left too long in the heat. That decay is what finally overtook Wuxian's palace. By the early years of the new century, the empress was failing. Her eyes, once sharp enough to silence ministers, now struggled in the dim corridors. The voice that had once frozen armies emerged in broken breaths, weakened by fever and coughing. The body that had defied an empire was becoming its own prison. On the surface, the state still functioned. In truth, what Wuxian presided over was no longer a political heart, but a tumor dressed as an administration. The Zhang brothers had become its vital organs. They were no longer favorites. They were the system. They controlled access, dictated policy, and reshaped authority as if the throne were a private board game. Wuxian had granted them such intimacy that the boundary between her will and theirs blurred beyond recognition. As the empress withered, they flourished. Their youth stood out brutally among the aging court. Their silk robes, polished skin, and graceful movements at banquets contrasted sharply with the severity of the old aristocracy. Beauty itself became a badge of authority, and that made them intolerable. The palace began to turn on itself. Rumors sharpened into weapons. Whispers spoke of rituals disguised as excess, of shared bars, of imported perfumes meant to mask decay, not only of the empress's body, but of the entire regime. Each story fed the same conclusion. Something had gone too far. Wetten clung to the throne as the nights grew longer. Sleep abandoned her. She was guarded by eunuchs who no longer knew whether they served a ruler or a spectre. Her hand shook as she signed decrees. Her memory faltered, but her will, even in decline, remained intact, and that frightened her enemies more than her strength ever had. Powerful women are tolerated only if they fade quietly. Wu Zetian refused. She did not surrender. She did not step aside. She chose to die an empress, and for that, history punished her, not with steel, but with poison. The poison of ridicule, distortion, and rewritten memory. While her body weakened, the Zhang brothers ruled from the illuminated shadows. One handled foreign envoys with measured smiles. The other oversaw the Kongan, now operating as a state within the state. No appointment, no execution, no message escaped their review. Some officials broke under the pressure. Some took their own lives. Others attempted escape. None succeeded. The surveillance network Wu Zetian had created had turned inward. The harem, once her sharpest weapon, became her cage. She no longer walked. She was carried through the palace in a golden litter, veiled in perfumed curtains that barely concealed the stench of decay. Her fingers swelled, her skin grayed. Only the Zhang brothers were permitted to touch her. Only they received her words. That exclusivity sustained their power and sealed her fate. Court life became unbearable. Every banquet, every audience, every silence felt loaded. Suspicion thickened the air. Betrayal no longer whispered. It waited. Quietly, a coalition formed. Senior officials, veteran generals, scholars who had once bowed to her authority. They did not shout. They did not rally crowds. They planned an ending. The coup came without spectacle. One morning, the palace gates simply stayed closed. Corridors stood empty. Musicians did not play. Eunuchs looked away. At the center of the stillness, Wu Zetian, wrapped in silken fever, understood what power could not prevent. Loyalty cannot survive on fear alone. Fear, like all living things, eventually dies. The winter of 705 arrived without snow, but heavy with iron. The palace awoke to the sound of armored footsteps scraping stone. No horns announced the change. History simply shifted. Doors once open to the Zhang brothers were sealed. Servants avoided their eyes. Everyone understood this was not a surprise. It was a conclusion. The brothers were seized at dawn, still in their nightrobes. One attempted negotiation. The other begged. There were no trials, no formal charges. The verdict came immediately. They were executed in the inner gardens. Their heads were displayed at the northern gate where foreign envoys had once passed. The message was unmistakable. The body that had seized the throne would be purged with blood and spectacle. Wu Zetian was awakened by strangers, not familiar voices, not loyal faces. Her body resisted movement. Fever burned through her. Still, she understood. The throne had abandoned her before her body did. She was forced to abdicate, not by swords or chains, but by documents, seals, and hollow ceremonial words spoken by men who had once trembled before her. The decree was sealed with her numb hand. Black ink stained her fingernail. No one wiped it away. When an emperor falls, his enemies often grant him tragedy. When an empress falls, they turn her into a monster. Overthrow is never enough. Her ambition must become madness. Her desire must be reframed as disease. Her legacy must be reduced to scandal. Wu Zetian was moved to a secondary palace, not officially imprisoned, but rendered invisible. She received no reports, issued no decrees, saw nothing beyond walls and unfamiliar servants. She died soon after. The exact date was never carefully recorded. There was no public mourning, no imperial procession. Only a modest burial followed by something far more thorough than death. Erasure. Official records were edited. The names of her consorts were removed. The Kongan was dissolved. Her decrees were annulled or reassigned. In Confucian texts, she became a warning. In poetry, a distortion. In folklore, a witch. Yet censorship is never complete. Some chroniclers left fragments behind, notes in margins, details too precise to invent. Titles she granted. Laws she reformed. Officials she promoted for merit rather than blood. Traces of a ruler who governed as men had always done, but paid a price none of them ever faced. After her fall, the restored Tang dynasty poured resources into reshaping her memory. They could not erase her existence, so they disfigured it. She became the empress of 3,000 lovers, a grotesque figure who discarded men as easily as decrees, a heretic who placed her bed above the law. These images were repeated until they hardened into doctrine. And with each repetition, the complexity vanished. The strategy behind intimacy disappeared because the truth was more threatening than any myth. Wooten was not destroyed by excess. She was destroyed by clarity. Her body died, but her memory was sentenced to a slower execution, selective forgetting, deliberate distortion, a narrative poisoned at its source. For centuries, official chronicles dragged her name through ridicule. Her administrative skill went undiscussed. Her ability to rule alone over a vast empire was ignored. Only one accusation survived, that she had turned the court into a brothel. Confucian historians perfected a bloodless weapon. Rewriting each lover was exaggerated, each shared night magnified. The Gongan, once a state institution, was retroactively described as an official brothel. Men who had served as diplomats, poets, and administrators were reduced to toys. None of this appears in the original Imperial archives. These stories emerged later when male rule needed justification, when her figure became a warning to ambitious women. In these retellings, the powerful woman always ends the same way. Alone, aged, reviled. In official history, male desire is framed as stability. An emperor's harem signals prestige, virility, continuity. Female desire, by contrast, is treated as corruption. When Wooten mirrored her predecessors, history did not call it authority. It called it sin. It called it sickness. The male harem left no descendants. No surnames survived. No children claimed lineage. That made erasure easy. There are no statues for Shu Huai. No tablets for Shen Nangshu. The Zhang brothers appear only as symbols of corruption, never as strategists. Their portraits were destroyed, their tombs defaced, their names severed from genealogy. They were removed with precision, as if they had never existed. And yet their absence speaks louder than records ever could. Every silence in history is a confession.